Snow whispered across the ridge as Sergeant Alden Kade pressed his chest deeper into the frozen crust, letting the mountain's chill swallow him. The cold didn't bother him anymore. It was the silence that made his pulse sharpen. Out here, silence meant the aliens were close, and the aliens rarely stayed quiet unless they were planning something cruel. He steadied his breath, tasting metal from the frigid air, and let the scope settle against his eye. Morrow knelt behind him, gloved fingers dancing across a compact sensor pad. The device pulsed faintly, throwing ghostly reflections on his visor. 3 signatures on the opposite ridge, he murmured. Big ones. Officer Cast looks like. Kade didn't look away from the scope. They moving? Not yet. Just standing there, like they're waiting for applause. Or daring us. Vask grunted from behind a cluster of snowdrift-covered rocks. The heavy gunner's voice carried a mix of irritation and anticipation. Battles made him restless. Waiting made him worse. Alera, their corpsman, scanned the sky instead of the ridge. I don't like how quiet the valley is. No patrol drones, no skirmish fire. Something's off. Everything on Theta 9 felt off lately. The aliens had shifted tactics. Less brute force, more psychological games. Kade felt the shift before he understood it. Now he understood too well. They were being watched, measured, tested. Through his scope, he caught the first clear glimpse of the alien officers. Tall, angular silhouettes with crystalline helmets that shimmered like frostbitten glass. They stood at the ridge's crest, framed by the jagged mountains, their posture too relaxed for a battlefield. One raised an arm and tilted its head as if mocking a salute. Another flicked its claws in a gesture Kade had learned to translate. Come try. Morrow hissed softly. They're taunting us, broadcasting some kind of open-channel laughter. Kade adjusted his grip on the rifle. Every instinct said the same thing. Ignore the provocation and relocate. The officers weren't here to fight. They were here to lure. It's something about their stance gnawed at him. They believed they were untouchable. Vask, cover the left flank, he said quietly. Alera, stay low and keep an eye on the back trail. Morrow, keep feeding me telemetry. What are you planning? Alera asked. Nothing stupid, Kade said, though a ripple of defiance warmed his voice. Just want to understand why they're showing off. He zoomed in until one officer's helmet filled the scope. Intricate crystalline veins pulsed faintly within it, refracting light into prismatic shards. He'd never seen one so clearly before. They usually stayed well behind frontline troops. The fact that they felt safe enough to stand in the open meant they believed their shields were still perfect. Sergeant, Morrow warned, ballistics won't penetrate that armor. Every report says the helmets are. Everything breaks, Kade murmured. Snow drifted between them and the ridge, soft as falling ash. The officers shifted again, this time stepping forward, lowering their heads in exaggerated challenge. Their confidence radiated across the distance, obvious even without translation. Kade slowed his breathing. He wasn't committing to a shot yet, but the possibility hung between every heartbeat. His squad sensed it too. The air tightened around them. Sergeant, Alera whispered, but Kade didn't answer. Not yet. On the far ridge, the lead officer extended both arms wide, opening its stance like a performer taking center stage. The gesture was clear. Humans were beneath them. Harmless. Predictable. Kade exhaled, a single, steady stream of vapor curling from his lips. Let's see how certain they are, he said. The mountain wind answered with a low, warning howl. Kade tightened his hold on the rifle, feeling the cold metal steadiness anchor him as the mountain wind prowled across the ridge. The alien officers remained motionless, still presenting themselves like arrogant statues carved into the opposite slope. Their crystalline helmets glimmered with inner fractal lights, shifting and swirling as though alive. They believed those lights made them invincible. That certainty irritated Kade more than their mockery. Morrow crouched closer, breath fogging in the frigid air. Telemetry locked. If you're actually considering taking a shot, I need to say this again. No one has ever cracked that helmet design. Not ballistic, not energy-based, not chemical. Nothing. Then something's overdue, Kade said, though he kept his voice even, almost reflective. His instincts weren't born from recklessness. They were carved from years of watching enemies underestimate humans. When the enemy was sure you couldn't do something, that was precisely when you had to try. Alera's voice reached him softly. If you miss, they'll triangulate us instantly. They're baiting you, Sergeant. Maybe baiting all of us. I know, he replied, still not lifting his eye from the scope. But look at them. They're not hiding behind troops. They're not using concealment or shield domes. They're challenging us in plain view. What? Vast's growl rolled over the comms. Because they're full of themselves. Let me lob a few grenades up there and see how smug they stay. No, Kade said. Noise gives away position. We keep this quiet. Quiet. The word lingered like ice on his tongue. The entire valley felt too quiet, as if the world were holding its breath. Snowflakes drifted with unnatural slowness, suspended in the frigid air, reflecting the same pale shimmer as the aliens' helmets. Kade wondered if they were manipulating the atmosphere or if the mountain itself sensed what was coming. He adjusted the rifle's sighting algorithm manually, ignoring the computer's repeated warnings about target resilience. He trusted his judgment more than any predictive matrix. The aliens' helmets had a pattern, subtle but present. A faint ripple along the crystalline veins whenever the officers moved, like a resonance lag. If that resonance could be disrupted, Morrow, he murmured, feed me their movement frequency. Just the micro shifts. Morrow blinked. You think the helmet material's reactive? Everything in their tech reacts to something, Kade said. They build with synergy in mind. That means every strength has a hinge. Vask let out a low whistle. You're really going to try this? Kade didn't answer. He narrowed the angle, slowed his breathing, and let instinct take command. The officers continued their display, utterly confident, utterly unguarded. The lead officer raised one clawed hand again, not in challenge now, but in clear dismissal. To them, humans were background noise. He squeezed the trigger. The rifle delivered a subdued thump, the shot muffled but potent. A faint vibration ran through the snow, as if the mountain acknowledged the attempt. Kade tracked the round's path through the air, a nearly invisible shimmer against the dazzling white terrain. For one infinitesimal moment, nothing happened. The lead officer remained motionless, head still tilted in scorn. Then the helmet fractured. A thin radial crack bloomed across its surface, delicate as a frost pattern. The alien jerked, claws twitching in disbelief. A heartbeat later, the helmet detonated in a burst of sparkling shards, scattering crystalline fragments into the wind like shattered stars. The other officers recoiled, and their helmets splintered almost simultaneously, each explosion sharp and crystalline, each eruption echoing across the ridge like glass bells breaking. Morrow shouted, Kade, I don't know what you just did, but we need to move now. Alien troops below erupted into chaos. Confusion, fear, and raw disbelief rippled through their ranks. Their formations disintegrated as they scrambled for cover. Kade pulled back from the scope, pull steady despite the pandemonium. Pack up. We're leaving. Vask was still staring. How did you? Later, Kade cut in. Move. The squad began withdrawing into the snow-laden ravine behind them. As they disappeared into the winding white corridors of the mountain, Kade cast one last glance toward the ridge where the helmets had burst like brittle ornaments. The aliens had believed themselves untouchable, and now they'd come hunting for the one who proved them wrong. The mountains swallowed the squad as they pushed deeper into the ravine, moving fast but not recklessly. Every echo, every shifting stone felt amplified. The aliens would regroup quickly, and Kade knew they would not let the humiliation go unanswered. Alera kept glancing back, her expression tense beneath the frost clinging to her lashes. Vask scanned the high ledges with his heavy weapon ready, while Morrow muttered data, strings under his breath, trying to understand the impossible resonance event they had just witnessed. They emerged into a narrow cove where a camouflaged entry hatch-blended into the rock. Kade tapped the access plate, and the metal iris spiraled open, granting them shelter inside the forward command bunker. Warm recycled air washed over them, but it did nothing to ease the tension crackling between the squad members. Officers and technicians paused mid-task as the four pushed through the airlock, streaked with snow and adrenaline. Colonel Harvin stood before they could speak, his lined face hardening as he read their expressions. Report. Kade kept it concise. 3 officer-class aliens on the ridge. They taunted, exposed themselves, and I took the shot. Their helmets shattered. All 3. The colonel stared at him, as if he had spoken myth rather than fact. You destroyed officer helmets with a ballistic round? Yes. Harvin exhaled sharply. You realize what that implies? Morrow stepped in, eyes bright with a mix of disbelief and analytical hunger. Sir, their helmet lattice reacted to the shot. The crystalline structure didn't just crack, it resonated and overloaded. Something about the mountain's temperature, or maybe their internal frequency, made them vulnerable. And now, Harvin said, the aliens are in chaos. Temporarily, Kade corrected. They'll adapt. They always adapt. A technician hurried over, holding a datapad, trembling in her grip. Colonel, long-range scans show large-scale enemy movement. Multiple formations converging toward this sector. Looks like they're deploying elite units, biorigged hunters. Vast grinned humorlessly. Good. I've been bored. No one is bored, Harvin snapped. He turned to Kade. Your action destabilized their command network. Officer helmets aren't just armor. They're control nodes. You killed leaders and severed some kind of psionic link. Their frontline units are confused, maybe disoriented. But the higher command will not tolerate that vulnerability. Kade absorbed the information quietly. He remembered the moment the helmets burst, the strange echo in his chest, the brief flicker across the valley, as if something had been unhooked from reality. It hadn't been just physical destruction. Something deeper had broken. Morrow pulled up a raw signal feed on the nearest console. Sir, listen to this. A chaotic wash of alien transmissions filled the chamber. Frantic orders, desperate calls, and, most unsettlingly, voices of soldiers who sounded lost rather than disciplined. Alara leaned closer, brow furrowing. They sound terrified. Harvin rubbed his temples. If their officers maintained psionic control, the disruption might be freeing some soldiers from whatever influence binds them. That could either fracture their ranks or drive them into violent confusion. Kade felt a weight settle on him. So we've thrown their hierarchy into turmoil. Yes, Harvin said, and that brings danger we can't predict. Before further analysis could take shape, the bunker shuddered. Loose frost dropped from overhead vents. Warning klaxons pulsed red across the walls. Incoming bombardment, a voice shouted from the command pit. Alien artillery, adjusted for ground ricochet. They're not probing, they're hunting. Harvin pointed sharply. Kade, your squad is redeployed immediately. You'll reinforce Ridgepoint Delta and hold it until reinforcements arrive. The enemy is massing, and we need a stable front line. Kade nodded without hesitation. Orders were oxygen. But beneath them lay a deeper understanding. The aliens weren't just retaliating. They were panicking. And panic from a species built on strict psionic command promised something violent, something unpredictable. As the squad rearmed and prepared to move back into the storm-ridden mountains, Kade felt the looming shape of the truth closing in. Destroying those helmets hadn't just won them a tactical advantage. It had exposed a secret the aliens never intended humanity to discover, one powerful enough to shatter an empire. And the empire was coming to crush the ones who had dared break it. Snow churned in violent spirals as Kade led his squad toward Ridgepoint Delta, the blizzard twisting the world into a white labyrinth. The distant thunder of artillery rolled across the mountains, each impact shuddering through the ice beneath their boots. Kade felt the pressure of the moment settle into his bones, but beneath it pulsed a hard clarity. The aliens weren't attacking with discipline. They were lashing out. And creatures capable of psionic dominance did not panic without reason. They reached the ridge just as the first wave of Loyalist aliens crested the opposite slope. Strange silhouettes, warped by chitin plating and bioluminescent veins, scrambled with desperate energy. Their movements lacked the eerie precision usually seen in alien formations. Now they charged with frantic disorder, as if trying to drown their own fear with violence. Kade dropped to prone position, rifle already anchored in the snow. Alara, cover the right chute. Morrow, get sensors up now. Vask, hold fire until I call it. Vask muttered an eager affirmation, settling behind a rocky outcrop. The ridge offered brutal exposure, but also a commanding view. If they lost this position, the entire valley would collapse into enemy control. A cluster of alien troopers broke forward, screeching with unmodulated fury. Their helmets flickered erratically, lights stuttering like dying stars. They're unstable, Morrow said, voice tight. The feedback from the officer helmets must still be ripping through their neural link. Kade squeezed off 3 shots in quick succession. Each round found its mark, dropping the oncoming soldiers with clean efficiency. But the next wave was larger, and behind them marched figures far more controlled. Alien elites wearing new crystalline helmets with thicker latticework. The fresh officers moved with cold, deliberate purpose, weaving psionic influence into the chaos ahead of them. Vask opened fire, each blast sending shock waves through the snow. These new ones aren't hesitating, he growled. They're locking the others back under control. Not all of them, Alara called. She pointed to a small knot of aliens who had turned away from the battle entirely, fleeing downslope in confusion. Their helmets were fractured, barely holding together. They seemed more bewildered than hostile. Some are slipping the leash, Kade said, but the Loyalists won't let that continue. Even as he spoke, the new officers reached the front line. Their helmets ignited with crystalline radiance, sending psionic ripples tearing through the ranks. The fleeing aliens stiffened, shrieking as invisible chains dragged at their minds. Morrow's sensors flared. Sergeant, one of those officers is carrying something different. Energy spike levels are off the charts. Kade followed his pointing finger and spotted a towering figure ascending the opposite ledge. Its helmet wasn't merely crystalline. It pulsed with a deep violet glow, each beat sending visible distortions through the air. Snow vibrated, rocks cracked, and the surrounding alien troops snapped into rigid formation. That's not a standard amplifier, Morrow breathed. If that thing finishes charging, it could override every mind on this mountain. Humans included? Alara asked. He swallowed. Yes. Kade steadied his rifle. The distance was immense, the wind savage, and his equipment worn from hours of combat. But something in him hardened. Humanity had survived because it refused to surrender its will. Not to fear, not to stronger species, not even to inevitability. Give me wind data, he said. Morrow rattled off readings, adjusting for the violent gusts. Vask laid covering fire, keeping the elites pinned. Alara pressed a stabilizing hand against Kade's shoulder, not to steady the rifle, but to steady him. Kade inhaled deeply, letting the world narrow to a single point of light far across the ravine. The alien commander raised its arms, and the violet glow built to a blinding crescendo. Kade pulled the trigger. The shot sliced through the storm, vanishing into the swirling snow. For a heartbeat, nothing existed but silence. Then the commander's helmet shattered in a burst of amethyst shards, the psionic storm collapsing with it. Alien troops faltered, their formation breaking apart like ice under sudden sunlight. Some dropped their weapons, stunned and newly free. Others fled into the valley, no longer driven by a mind that wasn't their own. Vask exhaled a long, ragged laugh. Kade, you did it again. Kade lowered the rifle slowly. We held the ridge, he said, though his voice carried something quieter, an understanding that the mountain itself had shifted. Alara stepped beside him, watching the embattled valley transform into chaotic retreat. So what happens now? Kade studied the horizon, where dawn was clawing its way through the storm. Now, he said, we find out what an empire looks like without its chains. And for the first time since the war began, the future, though dangerous, felt like something humanity finally had the power to shape.